everybody, welcome back to Rain and Pours. Today I am putting some resin on some pop sockets, so let's get straight into it. Alrighty, so here I have 51 pop sockets that we poured over the weekend. We did 17 sets of 3. My partner actually poured every single one of these and he did a brilliant job. And I wanted to show you how I tape up these pop sockets so that paint doesn't get all on the underside. One of the problems that I found was if you tape them this way, and these are incredibly difficult to tape, if you tape them when they're flat, the paint gets underneath and this gets really dirty and it doesn't look great. So I paint them extended halfway, and I'm going to show you how I prepare that for painting. So I've got my thick tape here. Again, I use the Scotch tape, the blue one, with the sharp lines technology. I find that works best for me in keeping the paint out from everything that I do, tiles, canvas, all of that sort of stuff. I'll just adjust this. Now, when I tape this up, I know that the outside perimeter of my pop sockets, so my pop sockets are about 4 centimeters, you can see there, and the outside perimeter of that is about 14 centimeters. So what I do is I will take my ruler, stick down the end of the tape to the ruler, and just roughly cut this with my scissors. And that's one length of tape. Okay, so I'll normally cut up a whole heap of these and just have them sitting on the sidelines ready to go. Then with the tape, I use 48mm tape. 48mm tape is a bit too thick to wrap around these. So what I do is I fold it in half with the sticky side facing out, and I put a crease at that halfway point just so it stays nice and crisp and shut. And then I take my scissors and I cut straight down the center as evenly as possible. A longer pair of scissors definitely would help here. So I'll leave that piece off to the side. Now with the pop sockets, I extend them fully. Let me get some focus here. Okay, so I extend them fully, and then with the tape, I take the flat end, and that's going to face downwards. So the cut end is going to go directly up under the rim of the pop socket, and I'm going to place it down, and this is really tricky. You do need to be a bit dexterous with this. I'll try and zoom in for you all. Okay, here we go. And let me get some focus on it. Right. And I don't tape these up fully extended. What I do is I leverage this bottom part in, so it's one extended down. So they pop all the way in, pop all the way out, and then I take this part and just angle it down so that the part closest to the top where you're going to pour is extended, but the bottom part is not. Then you take the tape and with great difficulty hold that in place and slowly twist the pop socket in your hand until it meets the other side. Now don't fuss if that little part folds over there. That doesn't matter, as long as you can make a seal at this end. And so I just pinch that together and try and push that down towards the top of the painting surface as far as possible. And that is one pop socket taped up. Now the benefit of doing it this way is that when you do that, it's going to be nice and even and flat as it lays down on the table. So I'll show you another one just to illustrate. So let's push this part down, and we take our tape, hold it on. You want to hold it just slightly in from the end to give you the best chance of having a grip on it. And these do come undone frequently, like when you're trying to handle them. They do slip out of your hands, they are slippery, so just be careful, be warned that they will fly everywhere. And with this piece, you can see it's not exactly perfectly even. That's going to mean as that sits on our board that it's going to angle one direction, and you can see with examples like this that it's not even, so all of the paint slipped off one side. So what I will have to do with this piece is make sure that whichever direction it was facing, that it's all slid off. I'm going to cut on the opposite side. I'm going to cut this tape so that it's not as angled, because when I apply the resin, all of the resin is also going to slide off, which we don't want. So that should hopefully eliminate that lean, and you can sort of tell with your pieces how they're sitting on the board if they're leaning one way or the other. So with this piece, I just take my scissors and I chop just that little bit on the end so that it's sitting nice and flush. Okay, and that is how you prepare pop sockets. So there's two nicely done there, and they should be roughly the same width of tape. It doesn't really matter how tall they are. This is also going to aid in when you pick these up and move them around. So I paint these on my spinner and then I lift them off. When you paint pop sockets, you want to paint them all in one go. What I mean by that is you can't really spin them because they are so small. There's just not enough force being applied on your spinner to be able to actually spin any paint off of them. So when you paint them, once you blow them out, you want to make that blow the one and only one that you do. I'm just going to move my camera so you can better see how I apply the resin to these. I have to remember to keep focusing on everything so that you can all see it and it's not blurry. Okay, so I've got a whole heap of different varieties here. We did some just interference colors, we did some with chameleon pigments. So this one's an interference one from This Little Piggy. It's just got rose quartz on there. We did some with chameleon colors. So this one has a chameleon pigment called Beta, and this one turns from deep blue to purple in certain light. What else do we have? We did fluorescence, we did just plain colors, plain reds and greens and things like that. We did green mixed with pink for a few of those. So my partner did a really good job, really happy with how these turned out. And we added the first set of pop sockets to our website last night. So those are up for sale if you would like to buy one. And these just go on the back of your phone. So if you don't know what a pop socket is, these extend and they go on the back of your phone and they just sit between your fingers and it makes it more comfortable to hold your phone. So if you've never heard of a pop socket or never seen one, that's what they do. Okay, so I'm going to mix up some resin and we'll be back to apply that to the surface. Alright, so while I'm mixing up the resin, I'll just talk a little bit about how much you should mix up for these. The answer is I'm not actually sure because these are very, very small and you don't end up putting a lot of resin on there. So the amount that you'll need to mix up can vary greatly and I don't exactly know how. So I'm going to wing it and hope that I mix up enough and not that I mix up too much. It is a good idea to have some resin molds handy for leftover resin. So if you do end up mixing up too much, you can pour it into those molds and just make a cumulative mold of something. Always better to use it up than to throw it away. I'm just trimming off this one because it was uneven. Okay, so for this, I'm going to mix maybe, I don't even know, maybe 100 milliliters of resin. Let's just see what that does. I might even go with 80 to start with. I can always mix up some more, but once it's mixed, it's mixed. You can't take that back. So let's start off with 80 milliliters of resin. So I mix my hardener first, and the reason I mix the hardener first is because it makes mixing in the resin much easier. So something very important is don't mix up the bottles, the lids for the bottles of your resin and hardener, because if you mix them up, you will never ever open your bottles of resin again. They will be on there permanently. So make sure you only ever open up one bottle of resin at a time. What I'm doing now is I'm just using my heat gun to gently heat up my resin in the bottle. It's been very cold here, so the resin isn't flowing nicely out of the bottle and it's going to be difficult to measure such a small amount. So just using my heat gun to go around the edge of the bottle and warm it up just slightly. And it's just enough that it's going to pour out nicely for me. Now it's very difficult to measure out small batches of resin, especially if your resin portion is too thick, like mine was. So it is a good idea to save all of your resin projects for one day and do them all at once. And that way you're not going to be miscalculating how much resin you'll need by doing smaller amounts if your resin doesn't flow as easily as it should. Now, as I do with all of my resin projects, unless they are specifically requested not to, I mix a little bit of glitter into the resin. And when I say a little bit, I mean the tiniest amount. So I just dip my pinky into the glitter and tap that into the container for this size amount. because if I were to dip my mixing stick in there, I would surely grab too much. Just going to dust this off into the bin. Doesn't matter that it's all over my hands. And I'm going to mix this up for about 2 minutes just to get this resin combined. I'm not going to bother timing with this. I know what my resin should look like. It should go nice and clear. Now, when you are working with thicker resin and resin in smaller amounts, you are more likely to introduce air bubbles. So heating up the cup just from a distance on the outside to soften that resin again is going to help, but it's also going to slightly speed up the curing reaction of the resin. So you want to be careful when doing that, because you can also melt your cup, which you don't want. Okay, and again, if you have a cup that has ridges underneath in the base of the cup, make sure you get your stir stick right in there. Make sure all of that is combined. I'm not fussed about bubbles in these. And what I may do for some of these pop sockets is I may add some opalescent effect. So I'm going to separate out which ones I want to add those to now. And I think I'm going to add them to my chameleon ones and the interference ones. So these three here, they're going to get opal flakes. These chameleon ones are going to get opal flakes. And I think maybe these blue and pink ones may also get the opal flakes. Everything else goes back on and they will get the glitter. So I will add those opal flakes at the end once I have done all of the other coatings. And just so I remember that, so these aren't in their order. So this is what I was talking about earlier. This was one that we just poured straight over. And this one had the tape. I taped it flat. And you can see that bottom is really dirty. It's covered in paint. And that doesn't look very professional. So this one will probably go to a family member if they want it, because I don't feel comfortable selling those. Now, it's easier to separate these now before the resin goes on, because if the resin sets, they'll be a lot harder to separate. Okay, so now let's start. And I'm going to start at this end, so I know which ones are going to get the opal flakes. Just make sure they're not touching. There's no bits of paint that they're leaning on that are going to tip the resin off. And the amount of resin that we want on these is minuscule. So you don't need much at all. So I'm literally just dropping that on with my stir stick, because the resin will not want to go over the edge. I find when I paint pop sockets, the resin doesn't want to flow over the edges of the actual pop socket, and neither does the resin. So there's no point putting on more than is necessary. So just dolloping it on. If you're in Australia, the amount I'm adding is maybe a 5-cent piece worth, and that will spread out to cover the whole surface eventually. Maybe a 10-cent piece. I could be lying. Oh no, and then that happens. Damn. Okay. So if that happens and you end up sticking your stick to the pop socket, having that space underneath is just fine. Because then the resin isn't going to be touching the bottom of the tape. Okay, so that's most of those done. Now I'm going to put the Medusa flakes into my resin. So these flakes are from the Glittered Pixies, and this one is called Medusa. And I'm going to put the tiniest amount in here because we don't need much at all. And that's just going to give it a really nice sparkly opalescent effect. quick stir for that, and then we can do these ones. And if I have leftover opal glitter, I'll go over some of the other ones. Just try and make sets of 3. I was a little bit conservative with the resin on those last few that I did because I didn't know if I'd have enough. But I do have plenty. Okay, so now let's start applying the resin. So I'm going to work my way from one end to the other. Just use my finger to smear that resin on. And it's just got to cover the whole top surface. I also do like to go around the edges to make sure that the resin and the paint is all adhered and that it's not going to come off. So rub around the top, make sure everything is coated, and then I take that bit of resin that's left on my finger and take it around the side. And they're nicely done. Then when I hit these with the heat gun, that will soften that resin up a little bit, it'll make it spread, and it'll even everything out. So the same principle applies. Resin won't go over the edge unless resin has touched it. Okay, so here I'm just topping up the pearlescent ones, making sure that they've got enough resin on them, and because I've got the pearl medium or the pearl glitter, opal glitter in this, I just want to use it up on these, make sure that they're all covered. I'm not wasting any resin. And there was one just here, if you could see I was shifting the weight, just using some offcuts of the paint from underneath. They were uneven, so I've just used some offcuts of paint that I snipped off to prop up the side that the resin and the paint was running off. So they should be nice and even now. Once that resin's applied, I'm just going to clean off my gloves, a bit of paper towel and some isopropyl alcohol before I touch my heat gun. And as usual, just heat everything up. So we're heating up the resin to remove any bubbles and to make sure it's all flowing nicely. Looking good, looking good. Okay, you always want to check these things from multiple angles, because what you can see from one side you might miss on the other. Okay, I think we're good. Now I'm going to take my blowtorch, my Appetito chef's torch, and I'm just going to lightly torch over the surface to get rid of any bubbles and make sure everything is nice and clear. Alright, and I think these are good to go. Double checking again. Doesn't hurt to check 2 or 3 times as you go along. You will find missed patches. one up again, make sure it's nice and coated, and hit it with the heat gun. Make sure that it's flowing. So that yellow one happened to have bubbles in it, so those bubbles are going to be noticeable in the final finish, and I may not end up selling that one. So that is fine. And that's how you prepare and resin pop sockets. So I'm going to put these aside, ready to cure in my drying rack, and they should be ready to remove the tape tomorrow. So here are the finished pop sockets. They turned out fantastic. So I'll show you an example of one of these. So this is one that had the opal flakes in it. And let me get you right in here. So you can see that amazing color shift color. So it looks pretty white at certain angles, and then you've got all of those amazing opal flakes and that rose quartz sequins interference going on there. So I think this one was just rose quartz. And very hard to keep this in focus, but there we go. Then we've got our color shift one. So this one's the blue to purple, deep blue to light purple. Looks absolutely amazing. And what else have we got? We've got some techno ones, we've got some of these. These have a chameleon pigment in there as well. So this one's also a blue to purple color shift, but it goes through green as well. So a couple of different designs there. These should go up on our website fairly soon. So we'll give these about 2 weeks to cure, and then we'll put these on our website. So the way I remove the tape from these is simply by unrolling it. So the best way of taping these up means that they're nice and clean, and there's no resin, there's no drips, there's nothing. Let me get the focus right on my camera. Why isn't it working? There we go. So there's no resin drips under here. There's nothing on the bottom. It's nice and clean, and the underside of this is nice and clean as well. Just a really nice professional finish. So once I have done that and I've taken the tape off them, I'm going to get a separate board. And what I like to do once I've got the tape off a product, so either my coasters, pop sockets, anything like that, once I've taken the tape off, I put it on a separate board that doesn't have the silicone mat underneath. I reserve the silicone mat boards for all of my painting. So if you do get a little bit of paint on the underside here, don't stress about it. It's a handmade product. It's not done by a machine. It's not, you know, all stamped and poured exactly the same. So a little bit of overspill is perfectly fine. And in fact, it helps, because if there is a little bit of overspill to the underside, it helps to seal that resin and the paint onto the surface. Now, if you do get a fair bit of it, like I do have on this one, just take your craft knife and run it along just the underside of the inside, not the actual bit that's on the top, and just peel that off with the craft knife. And there we go. It's nice and cleaned up, and that's not going to make any difference to the function of the pop socket. Okay, so I will take these all off. Now sometimes if you've painted and taped very closely to the top of that, it will get stuck, but it comes right off. Now you can tell here my resin is still very soft, very pliable. This is the best time to take all of the tape off them. While that resin is still soft, if you let it harden too much, it becomes quite difficult. Okay, and that's it. So you can see these were all stuck together, but the tape peels off nice and easy. Just rip it straight down the center, and it all just rolls straight off. And then you've got some nice clean pop sockets ready to sell. So as usual guys, if you're liking what I'm doing here, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.